gavel's banging on things. Good morning. We're going to call our meeting to order. Staff, do the roll call, please. Paul Wilson, present. Scott Tillman.
The conference has been unmuted.
Scott Tillman, present. Pete Weaver, here. Jesse Cooper, here. Mark Benuti.
Here. Can you hear me?
I can, Mark. Can I have your phone number that you're calling in on, Mark?
928-606-6160.
Thank you. Just want to make sure I'm not muting your phone number.
Okay, yeah, and I tried to sign in on the iPad I have here, but it won't let me, so I printed off most of what I need.
Okay, fantastic. We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman. Give me 1 second.
The conference has been muted.
And Mark, you should still be with us?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Fantastic.
Okay, moving on to item 2, approval of the meeting minutes from the May 8th meeting. I believe the draft minutes were distributed first. If anyone's got any comments, corrections, or I'll take a motion to approve.
As written. Second.
I have a motion to approve the minutes as written and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. Item 3 is the topic on the Arizona Minimum Equipment Standard. This is an action item, and we have a presentation from Michael Britt.
All right, minimum equipment standards. The minimum equipment standards were last published in 2007 through the SIEC and the Interoperable Channels Plan Working Group. The general idea was to revisit those and see if they needed updating. In a presentation we gave in May, we discussed combining all the bands into one standard and to really not modify that much about the VHF and UHF. The Interoperable Channel Plan Working Group felt that they were reasonable. We did reorganize the document into a background section talking about the legislative aspects of the SIEC and oversight over the frequency bands, and then discussion of the Homeland Security grants and V25. The standard section, again, including all 4 bands, and pretty simply laid out minimum channels, display, frequency, and then whether they're narrowband or P25 cable. We have a draft for approval of the actual document. It's in your handouts. Go back a slide. Okay, sorry.
Are there questions on the standards?
That's just one comment. I like the new format.
My question is, spent a lot of time thinking how can we have a consistent format across all our policy standard procedures, and so you'll see moving forward we're going to begin to roll all of those into this same type of consistent standard.
Right.
Is there a particular reason why we're at 48 channel or greater and not 32?
It was just the consensus of the working group in terms of picking a number that was...
I was just curious.
Yeah, Scott, can you remember?
That we recommend for programming?
I think in our documentation we've kept everything to at least 16, so that allowed the other zones to be used for operational capabilities, and we didn't want to limit them. I think we want to make sure that they could at least get the minimum Arizona programming guide, which contains almost a full 16 in all 3 bands, and then that would allow the other 32 to be used for operational capabilities. Plus, I think most equipment you buy today, your minimum is 48 anyways, and you'd be talking some pretty legacy stuff, most likely that would only have a 32-channel capability. I think this was mostly for the grant guidance as well. People buying equipment with Homeland Security grant funds, we didn't want them buying a 16-channel radio and not being able to put in all the interoperable channels for interoperability. So I think that's how they came to that basis.
I'll make sure we weren't getting any proprietary issues, like with somebody else.
To spend more money. Get more channels.
I think the changes that we see here really just kind of dress this up a little bit, basically, and add the 7,800, I guess. Right. Otherwise, the standards haven't changed in reality now. Did we hear any comment from the public? Anyone in the audience like to address the issue? Hearing none.
The conference has been unmuted.
Motion.
I'll move we accept the proposed standards.
I'll second.
Motion and a second to approve the proposed standard. Any more discussion? Favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries. Moving right along. Item 4, the Communications Unit Program Documentation Presentation. This is also an action item. We'll have a presentation from the system.
Well, it's a good thing Michael was fairly brief because I have a doozy for you guys today. For anyone else who has the packet, there's a presentation and then 3 documents after that, which are the 3 procedures we'll be reviewing today and possibly approving. Before I move forward, I do want to take a moment to say a huge thank you. I'm extremely grateful for the work of the members of the work group, Jesse Cooper, Dan Wills, Mike Worrell, Jason Hatchett, and Michael Todd. Working on these procedures, I can only do so much, and it's their guidance, along with this committee's guidance, that really helps move us in the right direction. Additionally, the 3rd procedure, which we'll be reviewing, the training coordination procedure, worked very closely with Ron Koptic, the Director of Training over at the Division of Emergency Management, and also Becky Scott, she's the training coordinator over there. And they also helped us kind of brush off the cobwebs on that document and also move it forward. So without further ado, I'm going to discuss briefly the background of the COM-L recognition program and where it's moving, as well as the development of the document for the COM-L recognition program and the training coordination. Then we'll move on and we'll discuss each of the 3 procedures individually. So if you guys have questions, we'll stop in between. And then next steps. Okay, so SIEC, this committee had a communications unit working group. The PSIC office supported that group and developed the original COM-L recognition procedure, which was approved in 2010. First approved by this committee and then subsequently approved by the PSCC. On August 17th, this committee formed the NIMS Communications Unit Work Group and approved their policies and procedures. So now we have 2 documents. The 3rd document was actually created the following year in 2011. Once again, we worked with the Division of Emergency Management and the work group to develop the Arizona Communications Unit Training Coordination Procedure, and this committee approved that document last year. So that's where we stand with what we have. All 3 of the documents are required to be updated and reviewed annually. So during last year's process, revisions were made to incorporate the all hazards terminology. Department of Homeland Security was moving away from Type 3, so we wanted to be consistent. We also reflected some of the program changes that occurred at the federal level as far as for COM-L training courses. And additionally, in the recognition program, we further defined what it took, what was required as far as for the documents. We included the forms that were necessary that had to be filled out. We also defined Arizona agency as a requirement for our COM-L recognition. All 3 of the procedures were posted online For the work group procedures and the recognition procedures, they were on our COMEL webpage. The training coordination procedure was on one of our standards pages. As I mentioned, all three of the documents have to be reviewed annually. As we move forward, the hope is that this time next year, all three of these documents will stand up to the review. We've done as much as possible to have an eye to the future so that we don't have to make too many revisions. Unless, of course, DHS makes some revisions that we have to keep up to date. So the work group, I already thanked the members. They did take time out of their busy schedules to meet with me on June 26th. Following the guidance of this committee, we discussed moving forward and expanding the COMEL recognition procedure to be the communications unit recognition procedure. And that, of course, will encompass all of the communications unit positions eventually. They also used information for the updates to the COMEL program. For example, there will be a shift. Last year, we were told by the feds that the COMEL class was being changed from a 3-day curriculum to a 4-day curriculum. We're now being told that the shift is back to 3 days. I'm not sure when it's going to be effective. They haven't released documentation. But at this point, we are no longer referencing the curriculum link. So that was one change. Additionally, the work group reviewed information in an effort to give more detail to the recertification process or renewal of recognition, They did review information from other states. I have a laundry list: Indiana, Maine, Minnesota, New Mexico, New York, Ohio, Oklahoma, West Virginia, etc. So we did also use information from other states and leverage some of the changes that they've made. For example, Oklahoma has expanded. They have a COMEL and COMT recognition program. Minnesota is the same. Any questions so far on the work group meeting? All right. So, as I mentioned, you have all three procedures in your packet. It is important to note that if the recognition procedure is approved by this body today, it will be presented to PSCC next month for their approval. It will not be effective until approved by the PSCC. The second and third procedures, however, the NIMC work group and the training coordination procedures, only require the approval of this body. So although we will give the information to PSCC, we will not request approval on those two documents. I'm going to start with just a few general revisions, and then we'll move to each of the documents. As Justin already alluded to during Michael's presentation, we have integrated the new SOP template, so all three of the documents look very consistent. In addition to similar sections, for example, background, scope, definitions, we do now have a record of changes page. And this will hopefully help anyone outside of our office who needs to make sure that they're looking at the most current version. Likewise, if we ever give presentations or share information, it also is a nice roadmap to show anyone where we've been and where we're going. I did make updates to the document title after talking to the work group. So now the Arizona Regional All Hazards COMEL recognition procedure, we've replaced COMEL with communications unit. And again, for consistency, the training coordination procedure, we've included the term all hazards. This, again, is to further clarify that these are not NWCG comms unit classes. These are all hazards comms unit classes. We'll also revise the titles of the related materials, in this case, the resource list. It was once called the COMEL resource list. Now it will be the communications unit resource list. And the application forms have been retitled as well. Last but not least, you probably noticed in the documents that there was a lot of movement. The information is, for the most part, I'm going to say 80%. I'm throwing that percentage out there. 80% unchanged. Where we had to take out information because of DHS, OEC changes, that would be a change. But for the most part, it's all the same. It's just shuffled. So I'm going to do my best in this procedure. It would take me all day if I went through all the changes. I'm going to highlight major changes that occurred to the procedures and not just tell you what moved to where. All right, so we're going to start with the first one, the recognition procedure. This document describes the national process for certification. I do want to take a moment and note that that national process is what is presented in the course curriculum for both COMEL and COMT. Furthermore, it's supported by the National Council of SIEC, so it's not a process that we made up. It is a national process. The document also describes the requirements for requesting Arizona regional recognition for positions, and we did note in the document that have an associated Department of Homeland Security approved curriculum and an all-hazards position task book. So the communications unit, of course, has many positions. Right now, though, there is only a curriculum and task book for COML and COMT. We have been told that DHS is working on the Incident Communications Center Manager, or INCM, and also the radio operator, or RADO. So the way that we've written the procedures, when that happens, if it were to happen, say in 3 months, I'm being overly optimistic, our procedures would be prepared for that. We wouldn't have to make any changes. In the document, the background section is new. We've added additional information based on what people were asking us. During the COML classes earlier this year and in 2011, we did have some questions. So we incorporated a description of NIMS, the incident command system, and we also provided a brief overview of the communications unit. We will be updating our COML webpage, and we will have more detailed information on the other positions, INCM, RADO, technical specialist, runner, etc. But we didn't feel that it was necessary to include it in the document. That's why we put it on our website. The scope still applies to individuals that are requesting Arizona regional recognition, but we added a notation. I'm going to read this quote. Individuals interested in serving only at the local agency level are not obligated to adhere to the following procedures unless required by their agency. This is for any individual who completes the training and completes their task book, or if they're already working for their agency and perhaps they haven't completed the task book, but they are operating as a COML. This takes care of that. There are going to be individuals in our state that do not want Arizona regional recognition. So we wanted to make it clear that they need to do what their agency requires of them. Are there any questions about that specific quote? Okay, then moving on. Definitions, we removed the definition of COML. That's not something that we control. And then we also brought up the definition of certifying official into this section because that is something that we drafted. Okay, Section 2, National Certification Process Overview. For anyone?
Just one quick question.
You bet.
For those individuals that don't want to become regionally recognized or what have you, there still is a training record within ADIM as to their completion of the courses?
It will show that they've completed the course, yes. Okay, for those of you following along, Section 2 is on page 3, the national process. Again, this is just kind of separating out the information that we had before. We did not overtly state in the recognition procedure that this is a national process. So we wanted to make it clear that this isn't just unique to Arizona. This is national. It gives the details on the requirements for the prerequisites for the COML course, that they must be satisfied, the COML course must be completed, and then furthermore the task book must be completed. So that's where Section 2.2 down here at the bottom comes in. I think we did a better job this time of explaining the role of the task book in that certification process. Okay, on page 4, Section 2.3, Agency Certification. Again, this was done to further solidify the fact that the individual needs to be certified by his or her agency. There was some confusion last year, and this is different depending on the state. There are some states that instead of having the agency sign off, the task book is signed off by a final evaluator and then sent up to a different body. Now, in our state, we've made it clear the certification does occur at the agency level. So again, this is just further cementing that fact. And then again, we also reiterate that individuals seeking certification should follow the certification process established by their agency. If there are additional requirements that their agency makes of those individuals, for example, additional training record information outside of what we require, we do not want to step on any agency. So that is why we noted it. Okay, Section 3 is also on page 4. This is a new section, the fact that we broke the information out. So first we discussed the national certification process, and then we move into the meat and potatoes, if you will, the Arizona regional recognition. We reintegrated the requirements for the application and the task book into this document. We wanted to make it to where, at this point, we've vetted the process. We know that it works. We're okay relinquishing control from the level of the SIEC back up to the TSCC, and any person who picks up this document who is a prospective candidate should be able to read through it and know exactly what they need to do to request regional recognition. So the forms have also been moved. I'll touch on that when we get to the appendices. The requirements that are specific to Arizona include the bullets at the bottom. An individual must complete the nationally recommended certification process first. They must be certified by an Arizona agency. And then we did note, if there are certainly individuals out there who will be qualified and who may want to be recognized as both a COML and a COMT. If that is the case, they must submit a separate and complete taskbook for each of those positions. Okay, I'm going to try to pick up the speed a little bit. On page 6, section 3.5, recognition renewal, this describes the process. We didn't change anything from what we had last year in per se as the intent. We just added additional verbiage to make it more clear. Prior to the end of each recognition period, the individual must provide certification, still by an Arizona agency, affirming that they continue to meet all the requirements. It doesn't state it on this slide, but it is noted in the procedure that the form in Appendix A is what the individual should use for that. So this time we've given a little more direction as far as for what paperwork they need. Additionally, they need to submit documentation of experience in formalized and recognized communications training. We did add exercises to this, full scale or functional, incidents and or events, and this is important, within the 3-year recognition period. We've gone further to state a little more information kind of about the consequences. If an individual fails to provide that information prior to the expiration of their recognition period, which is 3 years, they will be removed from the resource list. Now, part of that, our office overseeing this program, we will send out a letter to individuals. Right now, we're looking at 6 months, 2 months, and 1 month mark, so that there is plenty of notification that, hey, you're coming down to the end of your recognition period. If an individual is not able to provide that information before the deadline, sadly, they'll be taken off the list, and they would be required to submit all the information, go through the process again as it would. Excuse me, so we kind of put some teeth on that. On the flip side, if an individual does submit the documentation prior to that expiration, we will keep them on the resource list, and we will do so until their renewal application materials can be acted on by the work group. We realize that the work group's meetings are scheduled approximately 2 weeks prior to this committee's meetings. So if an individual is 1 month away, but there is no SIEC meeting plan, we do not want to penalize them. So that's why we noted that they will remain on the list until action can take place. We also noted in the procedure, so that we didn't have to repeat too much, during the work group's application review meetings, the work that they do will apply to both original applications as well as the renewal applications. Okay, I already mentioned appendices A and B. We put the forms back in the procedure. We will also provide the fillable forms in Word format on our website for ease of use. The 2 forms, of course, are the submission checklist, and that's the first, and the second form is the agency certification form. That is also used if a person changes agencies. There's also a section, it's kind of a 2-part form. If for some reason an agency wants to remove their certification, they can use that form as well. Last but not least, the resource list. I mentioned this earlier, that any of the documents that pertain to this procedure will be renamed. So we have renamed the COML resource list to Communications Unit. We also changed the structure, and there is a copy in front of Jesse right now. We restructured the list by county and modified it so it can include multiple positions. All right. Are there any questions about this procedure before I move on to the NCU work group procedure?
Yeah, I have a question if you can hear me.
Hey, Mark, I can hear you.
Hey, just on the recognition renewal, I thought I heard you say that it was Appendix A that they used, but in the procedure I see it says use Appendix B in their documentation for the first bullet. And then in the second bullet, it talks about documenting continuing education or experience, but do we have a minimum that they need to complete within that 3 years? Because as we say, everything else is really clear on what they need to do, but there's nothing that says they actually need any. On 3.7, it just says it's encouraged.
And I have 2 answers for you. So to answer your first question, I apologize, I must have misspoke earlier. It is Appendix B. Appendix A would be used for the initial recognition application. That's kind of their checklist. Say, yes, I've completed the class. Yes, I've provided my certificates of completion. Appendix B is the agency certification information. So this is where someone who's coming back for another 3-year period, they would fill out the revision of agency certification, even if they didn't move. Let's say you're with Phoenix PD, Jesse. I'm just going to look at you because you're an easy example. Prior to your 3-year recognition period ending, you would need to fill out Appendix B, the agency certification form, showing that the Phoenix Police Department still certifies you. So that was...
I just wanted to make sure. Maybe I misheard, but I thought I heard you say A.
Well, it could be that I misspoke as well. I'm not perfect.
No.
90%. 90% doesn't count. And then, actually, you know what? I'm glad that you brought this up. And, Jesse, if you want to say anything after I discuss this, that's fine. The work group, we had quite the discussion during their annual meeting about minimum requirements for recertification. Again, this is subjective review by the 5 members of the work group. At one point, we discussed possibly putting a minimum number of hours, for example, 24 hours. We didn't want to say how many hours that had to be training versus incident versus exercise. Then came the discussion, much like what was discussed last year about the initial recognition. Okay, well, are we requiring multiple incidents? What if it's someone who's done one really big incident that they were there for 3 days and they worked 3 12-hour operational periods? That's 36 hours versus someone who may be from a more rural county that has strung together 2-hour events. So that's the reason why we didn't specify in detail. It only says documentation. I'm actually going to flip that so I can read it. Documentation of experience in formalized and recognized communications, trainings, exercises, etc. It, again, will fall to the work group to review that information. Does that answer your question, Mark?
Well, it does, but I think it leaves it, I mean, when all of us with a history are gone, people look at that and go, why am I documenting something if there's nothing required? And I think the difference in the initial certification is at least there's a task book that's gone along with it that somebody signed off. Mm-hmm. So with this, it's more like, should there, and I know it's hard to quantify because it can be different, but maybe it should be documentation of any supporting activity will assist in continued recognition, something like that. If we're not requiring any, if somebody can come back in 3 years and not have any type of experience, continuing education, 0, this would say they're still eligible. Because it doesn't have a minimum.
If they can't show documentation of experience, and we did provide examples, for example, IAPs, the incident action plans, org charts, communications plans, so they could submit 205.
But it doesn't say I have to have at least one of anything.
Yeah, well, Mark, this is Paul, and I get your point. I kind of agree, I guess. However, since we are still somewhat new into the process, I guess what I would suggest is procedurally, perhaps the office can give guidance to, to the folks that are looking to renew as to the type of detail we're looking for, with the intent being to demonstrate that they've done something to keep their skills current, basically. And that might mean something different for each individual, just based on their the places that they're working, the availability of attending either tabletops or real incidents or what have you. But maybe through procedural guidance, giving some more information as to the intent of what we're trying to achieve, and then telling here's the type of information we're trying to see.
I like that. We could offer up samples similar to what we did with the task book. In fact, we could, if we need to, create some sample forms even. I know there are some other states. Indiana has quite the packet for their COMEL recognition program, and they have some samples of, for example, training, and it shows the information that would be needed for each training course. We could certainly do that and post that on the website to give that kind of information. Even though we provided samples or descriptive words someone could turn into comms plans, maybe we can list it out a little bit more and provide that guidance on the website.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm not trying to say we got to have a number of hours, but I think we need to be clear to whoever's reading it that there's an expectation that you do something. So maybe just like Paul said, or what you just said, Susan, is that in there we put, there's no specific minimum hours required. The intent is that you maintain a level of experience to meet the requirements of a COML, something like that.
So, Mark, are you thinking that the draft policy requires some further revision, or is that something, as I said, that can be done procedurally by the office after the policy is adopted?
I mean, I really think some sort of statement should be in that paragraph so it's clear to anybody reading it. I mean, everything else is so clear about requirements and where it fits in national Arizona. And then right there, it's document continuing education, but it kind of leads you, I guess I'm just in a world that I'm so used to continuing education, minimum requirements, what's qualified, what isn't qualified, that I kind of look right at that section and say, okay, now what do I got to do? And it just says, well, I give documentation of what I did, but it doesn't say that I have to do anything. It's just encouraged. In 3.7, it encourages continuing education or participation, but I didn't see where it required any form of activity.
Mark, I think this may help clarify. On page 6, in section 3.5, there are 2 bullets. The second bullet, I think, is what we're discussing as far as for documentation of experience for renewal of the recognition.
Right.
And this is
that's where my question came up.
Well, I was going to say we do specify, and I'm wondering if this is something that we should expand or if it's clear enough. At the end of the second bullet, there is a notation. Incident/event documentation should indicate that the individual served in the recognized position.
Yeah, but it still doesn't say they have to do anything. There's nothing here that says anybody has to do anything other than fill out their application. My bullet 2 thing could be, I didn't do anything. Now, then I would expect the review committee would come back and say, no, you didn't do anything. But I'll say in the policy, it doesn't say I had to do anything. Just I had to document if I did. I'm being the devil's advocate. I'm sorry, but...
No, that's okay. That's what I need. On that second bullet then, if you guys have a better idea, I'm thinking what I can do is expand that notation. Maybe what Mark had mentioned, there's no specific requirement for hours, but the documentation should indicate that the individual served in the recognized position at a level to maintain their certification at the agency level.
Susan, this might be as simple as adding 2 words to the beginning of the second bullet there on page 6, so that instead of just saying documentation, saying demonstration and documentation. So demonstrating you've done something in the past 3 years, and give us the documentation for it.
There you go. I like demonstration of experience. Provide documentation that you've have demonstrated experience, or demonstrated whatever to maintain it. I like that, Paul.
Okay, that's a lot shorter than mine. I like it. Okay, I will add that. Second bullet on page 6 of section 3.5, so it'll read demonstration and documentation of experience. Okay. Yeah,
there you go. I think that helps. I mean, still it may leave a little bit of a void because how do we demonstrate that? Well, okay, that is somewhat subjective, but at least there's some level of expectation that they're going to do something to maintain it.
And that it also needs to be, I did like the discussions with the workers, that it also needs to be in that position. If you're a COML, if you're recognized as a COML, and you come back showing your competencies, that's not going to cut the mustard. You need to show that you're acting in that position. So, is there any other discussion about the first procedure, the recognition procedure?
Just a quick question. What are other states doing for recertification?
I have that document. The other states that we looked at, there was a pretty wide range. About, I think, a third of them is a good number. A third of them don't even have a program yet. Tennessee, which has a really great recognition program, they haven't even gone to that next step yet. New York is the same way. Indiana, if I remember correctly, there's either a 2 or a 3-year recognition period, and they required similar documentation to what they required the first time around, showing training, showing experience. The information, the verbiage that we actually use is very similar to Oklahoma. In fact, Oklahoma's procedures are very similar to ours, same font, same content, but they took it a step further for COML and COMT. So we're actually in line with what other states are doing, but I believe 2 of 8 other states are requiring a specific number of hours.
I think the important thing is that the procedure is really for your regional recognition. So even if you don't choose to do that, doesn't mean that your agency doesn't still recognize you and that you can't still continue to perform in those capacities for the agency you're working for. I think that's important to recognize, that it doesn't mean that you have to hang up your spurs because you're done, kind of thing.
Well, and on the flip side too, there are some people that are working, as a COML, they haven't yet completed their task book. So I think, from the descriptions we put in there, we're trying to be very global for our state.
And Justin, perhaps just one quick question: are you going to need a separate motion from us for each?
We are going to need a separate motion. Our thought was reviewing all 3 documents since they're so interrelated, and that after we've gone through, making sure that we've got everything covered for you, then do a separate motion on each one. I noted the suggested revision to the unit recognition procedure.
All right, so I'm going to move forward to the next procedure, the National Incident Management System Communications Unit Work Group, Policies and Procedures. This document describes the structure of the work group, and it also describes the procedures that will be followed by the work group members as well as the PSIC office. Again, in sticking with our wonderful SOP template, we do have a new section 1.3 for the scope. It just notes that the document applies to the work group as appointed and directed by this committee, and it also applies to the PSIC office. Page 2, section 3.1 is information about receipt of application materials. For anyone who's not familiar with the version of the procedure that is still current technically, because this hasn't been voted on, there was one section that was titled Review. We've separated that information out to make it a little bit simpler and easier to understand. So it starts with the first part of that process, which is the receipt of the application materials by the PSIC office. This information also now references the recognition procedure as the source of instructions for someone who wants to submit materials. Okay, again, it's the same information about the PSIC office reviewing the submitted materials. That text did not change, it was just moved. Further down on that page, section 3.2, evaluation. Again, this is new because it has a new section title, but the information is the same. It discusses the work group's evaluation of application materials and the fact that they can request additional information if they need it. On the next page, page 3, review meeting, section 3.3. More of what I just discussed. It has information about the work group's review meeting, so that information hasn't changed. I mentioned this earlier for the recognition procedure. It's the same for the NIDCU. When the work group meets to do an application review, this applies to both initial application materials and now the renewal application materials as well. They don't have to do separate meetings. It also clarifies there was text that we thought might be unclear. So it notes that the PSIC office, although they may speak on a member's behalf, this will not be considered active participation. So when we do these meetings, there has to be, of the 5 members, at least 3 members actively participating. A member who's unable to attend or participate can certainly provide feedback, and our office will share that, but it does not count toward any vote for recognition. Okay, last item on this slide, section 3.5, reporting. This is information that was originally in another section. We've moved it into its own unique section just for clarification that after the work group meets, the PSIC office will provide a report to this committee, or a report will be provided. Now that's...
You know what? I actually, on 3.3, that second bullet, I think that bullet should be added to the other discussion we just had. Because that clarifies for an applicant what the committee will be looking at, or the work group will be looking at.
And Mark, that is in the recognition procedure, starting at the bottom of page 5 and going on to page 6. During the meeting, the work group will individually discuss each candidate's application on its own merit and submitted documentation of training, exercises, incidents, and/or events will be evaluated based on number, depth, and complexity. The work group caught that as well, and so we made sure to have it referenced in both documents. That's a great, so they caught that for me as well.
Okay, so what's in 3.3 is supposed to include 3.4 and 3.5. Good. So the review.
The statement about number, depth, and complexity that's in 3.3 of the NIM-CU work group policies and procedures is also included on the
also 3.3
all hazards comm unit recognition procedure.
It's in 3.3.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I guess this is looking as like a flow. So 3.2 is task book requirements. 3.3 to me is saying what you're going to do about 3.2, which is the task book requirements. Then you get to 3.4, giving initial recognition. Then you go to 3.5. So I don't know that I at least didn't tie the 3.3 into 3.5. I think that single bullet is worthy of putting in 3.5 because now we're beyond the task book. They're not submitting a task book. They're submitting, and I know it says just, how's it titled, review process, but it's right after task book.
And Mark,
go ahead.
The recognition procedure, actually, I have to admit that was one thing that we did work on was the flow because these documents, as Justin mentioned, are so interrelated. On page 7 of the recognition procedure, the second paragraph, this is technically in section 3.5, recognition renewal. Renewal applications will be evaluated by the work group during an application review meeting as noted in section 3.3. And 3.3 is where it states that the candidate's application will be reviewed based on number, depth, and complexity.
Perfect. Okay. Sorry I missed that one. Thank you.
You thought the same way I did. I almost restated the information in the renewal section 3.5, so we thought it was easier just to make the meeting applicable to both, and thus it references section 3.3.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Were there any other questions about the work group policies and procedures? Well, in that case, all right, I will carry on. We're almost there, you guys. It's like a marathon, not a sprint. Okay. The third procedure that you have is the Arizona, and we've added the terminology, all hazards, communications unit training coordination procedure. Of course, it does exactly what the title says, describes the procedure for coordinating this type of training in our state. We did revise this, as I mentioned earlier. Ron and Della were instrumental in moving forward. They were able to review the document with me and discuss some of the directions that the feds are taking. For example, Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management Institute, EMI, is getting ready to release additional guidance. So we made sure that everything was in line with what they're moving forward with. So this document was revised for consistency with those program updates and, of course, the revisions to the communications unit recognition procedure, which we've already discussed. So on page 1, section 1.1, background, we already have this section. It's not new. We just added information about the development of the courses by OEC. We also noted the expansion, again, ever the eternal optimist, noted the expansion of the recognition program from COML to comms unit, and we did remove some extraneous background information about the work group. Also on that page, section 1.3, scope, this is new. Again, we want to be very clear about the procedure and who it applies to. So it is applicable to counties or agencies in Arizona that, A, are interested in providing a training course using their own funds. We did note that those funds could be obtained through grant programs. And or B, a county or agency that wishes to use funds administered by ADEM to sponsor a FEMA-approved comms training course. And again, it has to be FEMA-approved. ADEM cannot put on a CommT course, but they can do a COML course because it does have a FEMA number. Okay, on page 3, We have Section 2, the course descriptions. We did revise this information. It still describes the COML, COMT, and the Train the Trainer courses. It still references, for example, Train the Trainer. We don't have a curriculum. It's whatever DHS requires. As I mentioned earlier, we did remove the course links because that is subject to change. We also noted originally the procedure said that a COML course will be led by 1 or 2 instructors. EMI's guidance as they move forward, they are now requiring will be requiring 2 instructors, so we revised the procedure to reflect that as well. We also tied it into the recognition program by noting that a candidate may seek Arizona regional recognition after being certified by their agency. So hopefully it kind of ties this procedure together with the processes and the other procedures. On page 4, we gave course funding its own section. It was previously included with another item. We thought that as we walked through this procedure, it made sense to kind of go chronologically. What is the course about? How do you pay for it? Then how do you move forward to schedule it? So course funding has its own section. Additionally, we removed the reference to IECGP, Interoperable Emergency Communications Grant Program, and we replaced that with State Homeland Security Grant Program, so SIEC. Also on page 4, utilizing Arizona instructors. This is technically a new section heading, but the information is the same. We just wanted to emphasize the required use of Arizona instructors whenever possible. Of course, this committee has already discussed it. The purpose of that is to reduce the cost of the course and also to use our local experts to leverage their expertise. Last thing on page 4 is section 4.3, utilizing Arizona instructors in training. This was previously titled Developing a Group of Arizona Instructors. We changed it to utilizing in order to indicate that this is a continuing effort. It's something that's ongoing. And we also changed the notation. The current procedure noted that the lead instructor should contact the PSIC office regarding these instructors in training. While if they're not familiar with our procedures, they really wouldn't know how. So we changed that. Now our office will contact the lead instructor. And I misspoke. We do have one more item on page 4. Section 5, training requests and coordination. Basically, we combined text that was already in the procedure and put it into this section. We provided a link. This is something that we clarified. Before, there were references to required documentation. Well, now we're being clear. It's a training event request form that the Division of Emergency Management requires. We have noted the link to that training event request form. And I talked at length with Ron and Becky about this, and I do want to note that filling out that form, for example, the COML class, by filling it out and providing it to ADEM, it doesn't go outside of the state, but it does generate additional coordination between their office, and in this case for COML class, EMI. They have to fill out an additional form to be sent to EMI for the COML course to be considered valid. So we're not including that in this document because that paperwork and those forms may change, but I did want to mention it. Okay, on page 5, section 5.2, this is a new section, training coordination using funds administered by a local agency. Before, we had only discussed how to coordinate when funds were being used through ADA. We wanted to put this section in, again, to cement the fact that this coordination is required regardless of the funds that you use. So it follows similar steps as what are in the next section. And if an agency does want to put on a course, they need to let ADEM know. ADEM will let the PSIC office know. If there are instructors in training, our office will work with the lead instructors. There's additional information that wasn't there before about IRMA. And again, thank you to ADEM. They mentioned if an agency wants to, for example, COML pass is AIM approved. If they want to conduct a COML course, IRMA could be used as their registration vehicle. Okay, section 5.3, training coordination using funds administered by ADEM. This is similar to the information that we had before. Truthfully, we just made a few tweaks and made the additions that ADEM suggested in regards to, not IRMA, but let me flip to the page and read it out loud. This has to do with students that are qualified to take the course. I'll tell you what page I'm on in just a moment. Thank you. Okay, I am on page 6. of the training coordination procedure. Number 7, course enrollment will be managed through IRMA. That has not changed. However, we did add the statement that students will be vetted for eligibility for final enrollment approval by the requesting agency. That is something that ADEM wanted to stress in either case if IRMA is used. When a person initially enrolls for a course, they can be listed as, what is their status? Pending approval by the hosting agency. So it will not be up to ADEM to qualify the students for participating. It is up to the agency. All right.
Does that change if ADEM is actually hosting the course themselves?
Even if it's money administered by ADEM, because technically they're not hosting it, it would be the agency that's sponsoring it. So, for example, the PSIC office, that's what we did. Pete, when you put on the class, we actually worked in partnership with Maricopa County, so our office was able to vet those individuals. Better answer to your question, there was a course in February of this year that was not sponsored by a county, and it was not sponsored by the PSIC office. And in that case, ADEM, it was EMI that brought out the training. I believe it was ADEM that did the review and vetting, although I'm not sure how they did it.
The COMEL course is a course offering from ADEM now, correct?
It is a FEMA-approved course that you can request through ADEM.
Through ADEM, but they don't just sponsor them individually on their own typically?
Yeah, not usually. It's not like the other programs. It's still pretty new to them. So luckily we have a big partnership.
And I think they use like county training funds to do that, so they probably default back to your county or whoever requested the training to occur as the vetting agency.
And luckily, there's a great office, the teaching office. They have a process in place. But if I may say so myself, it gets the job done. I won't say how good it is, but it gets the job done. And I know that we've offered up to other counties that if they want to use their funds, we'd be happy to use that proven process to aid them.
If you're tooting your own horn, you don't just say it gets the job done. You got to really go and outstanding, excellent, leader in the nation language. You know.
I'll wait until someone else says that for me, but it gets the job done. Okay, and last but not least, also on page 6 is section 6, course notification. This is text that was previously included as course notification list, but instead of just list, we didn't want it to specify only the PSIC office. We updated our language about our notification sign-up form, and then we also provided the link to IRMA, because if it is a FEMA-approved class like COMEL, they put it up on IRMA, and anybody is able to find that class. Anyone, who has access to IRMA, who is a user on IRMA, will be able to find that class. Okay, are there any questions about that specific procedure?
I have one comment, I guess. In section 3 under course funding, you took out your references to IDCGP, and I'm wondering if you don't want to make a similar kind of change to item B where you're referencing SIEC still, and just make a reference to federal grants as opposed to a particular grant program. That might keep you from having to make changes in the future then.
You might just put Homeland Security Grant Program because UASI is part of it.
So I just put federal because after November it could be called Lego Land or something.
Okay, so if you take out state and just call it Federal Homeland Security Grant Program.
I would just say federal grants.
Federal grants. I was just saying we list other Homeland Security grants.
It may not be specifically a Homeland Security Grant Program. It could be a, assistance to firefighters program or something else. So you might put just federal.
Or Homeland Security grants?
Just no Homeland Security, just federal.
Federal grants, period. Program.
Okay, so in section 3 on page 4, item B would state federal grants may be requested for policy enforcement. See, again, here I go with, 10 words that you guys can sum up in one word. This is why we call it coordination. Okay, then I'm going to hit this last slide. If the committee does approve the recognition procedure, as I mentioned earlier, it will be presented to PSCC on September 18th for possible approval. The other 2 procedures, again, only require approval by this body. And I alluded to it earlier, we will be updating our COMEL webpage. Some of the items that I didn't mention are the COMT passbook. We have an Arizona-specific COMEL passbook. We will add an Arizona-specific CompT task book with fillable forms. And then we will also update the task book frequently asked questions document where it will represent both the COML and CompT task book. All right, you guys, I made it to my very last slide. Are there any other questions that I can answer for the committee?
So before we move on to motions, then let me ask if the committee's got any other discussion on any of these documents that you'd like to have prior to that, and I'll open it up for the audience if they've got any input as well.
And it's a great package that they've put together, and like I say, consistency was nice.
Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the committee on this? Hearing none, then I guess we need 3 motions. So let me propose first a motion to approve the proposed Arizona Regional All Hazards Communications Unit recognition procedure with one change, that being to the second bullet point in section 3.5 to add demonstration and to the beginning of the sentence. I have a motion.
I'll second.
And a second. Assuming there's no further discussion, then all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Secondly, then I would propose a motion to approve the NIMS Communications Unit Workgroup policies and procedures as proposed.
I'll second that one.
Let's do the motion first.
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
Also move. Your turn, Mark.
Yeah, I'll do either the motion or the second, whatever you need.
Okay, you got a motion and a second to approve the NIMS Communications Unit Workgroup policies and procedures as proposed. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. And then lastly, I would recommend a motion to approve the Arizona All Hazards Communications Unit Training Coordination Procedure as proposed with one change, that being to section 3B, and replacing the references to specifically the State Homeland Security Grant Program with a reference to just generally federal grants.
So moved.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Is that efficient or what? Okay.
That was impressive.
Thank you very much.
I don't know about you guys, but Susan just did that, but I feel exhausted. Are we supposed to stand up now and do a 7-sentence?
Yeah, I think so. It's a good idea.
Thank you, Susan. Good job. Moving on to item 5, the National Public Safety Broadband Network Update. And this is an information and discussion item. Michael Brett with presentation.
Okay. So, I wanted to start out with reviewing our high-level plan that we presented earlier. During the PSCC meeting in July, Mike Burrell reminded us that we had a education and outreach bullet or concept to provide into this plan, so it's been brought back into the plan. It was in a side slide or an additional slide in the original presentation, and it did not make it into the plan. So basically, the intent of the Arizona Public Safety Broadband Network project plan is to keep track of what's going on nationally. We do have, in terms of upcoming events, we've got the FirstNet boards being stood up in another couple weeks, or another week actually. Provide input to the SCIP, which we have done, and it has also been presented to the PSCC and approved. Work with the Digital Arizona, which is the state broadband initiative, or Broadband USA style efforts being done by, being funded by NTIA and under VTOP funds for Arizona broadband mapping and so forth. And then work with 911 as well for the Next Gen 911 and its impact on the broadband initiative. Work with the Arizona public safety community to determine standards for statewide interoperability, and it's not a technical, by default almost, since it's a single system, it's by default interoperable, but then you need to work through the governance issues and how people are going to be set up on the network and so forth to make sure that we don't accidentally break the interoperability. Continue to report on progress. And then here's the point that was brought back in, the development and presentation of education and outreach statewide. Advise the PSIC office in regard to submitting a grant for the state and local implementation grant program, and that's that $134 million nationally. Work with the public safety stakeholders on how we're going to interact with FirstNet as a state, and then interact and negotiate with FirstNet and respond to their RFP proposal when it comes up. So that'll be down the road, probably a couple of years, 18 months to a year. And then perform a substantive analysis on that proposal to provide input for the opt-in, opt-out decision that's made by the government. So with this overall plan, now the order of things, we may not be able to do education and outreach and interaction at the local level until we get SIEC funding and so on and so forth, so that it's kind of mushy. This is not top-down. These are not in necessarily order, but they'll be worked in concert as we move along. On the kind of the upfront is that we've had a meeting with Televate, who did a study of Minnesota, and they determined that there's probably between half as much money available to a quarter the amount needed available to build out the public safety broadband network nationally. I mean, basically just taking that as a snapshot, let's model it, so we had Televate in, and they talked with us, with members of the Arizona Public Safety Broadband Network Working Group, and their publication of the report is out on the web as well, and we'll get that out on our webpage. The OEC is starting to develop surveys. They're doing pilots in Oregon and Iowa on how to survey the needs and requirements locally, and also how to accumulate and assess asset possibilities, what's available locally that might work towards defraying some of the costs. In Arizona, we've got the Digital Arizona Project has gotten legislation passed so that the rights-of-way on state and county roads can be utilized for conduit for fiber backhaul. One of the main drivers in my mind is that we need a lot of fiber to get the coverage we need out statewide. The plan is there's a proposed within the Digital Arizona Project of a 3,600-mile group of roads that would cover 98% of the population if you got coverage 20 miles on either side of those roads. That's kind of their concept. Within each of those, we're working with them to identify each segment, and then we need to kind of work as a compendium of education stakeholders, health stakeholders, government stakeholders, and public safety stakeholders to get everybody on the same page, hopefully, and to inform them of the progress as to what's going on as it goes on. And then from that, develop metrics to determine whether there are viable public-private partnerships or cost models to actually use the build-out funds for public safety broadband network. I want to open this for discussion now, get some input in terms of what do you think?
I don't think it'll be around before I retire.
Hey! Long-range plan. Long-range plan. Yeah, amen, Scott.
You know, and to that point, I guess, the second bullet point here, I don't know what kinds of assets they're going to look to be making shared use of. But I guess one comment that I would make is when you have these really long-term kinds of projects, you may assess that something exists today, and then you go to build 7 years from now, it's not there anymore.
Or it's full.
Right.
Is it personal experience?
In some instances, yes.
Michael, just a question on the identifying of the local stakeholders. I know this is a public safety network, and all of those entities are certainly public safety, but I can tell you that all four of those have a much different set of requirements as to what is considered a public safety broadband network. Have they looked in Minnesota and other places? Have they come to a consensus on what that looks like for these four entities? Because I can tell you that health and public safety both have mission-critical needs, but we both have very, very different expectations of what a broadband network is going to provide us.
Well, and I'm mentally making the distinction between the fiber backhaul and the vertical assets, because fiber can handle not only the public safety components of health and education, but also just the generic day-to-day, distance learning, telemedicine, and so on and so forth. It's more diagnostic than emergency-based and so forth. And then worry about the vertical assets and the sharing of those, because that's more of a hot potato issue in terms of, yes, we can share, or no, we can't share, especially when you start bringing up private and or utilities and so forth into those vertical assets. So my intent is to focus on the fiber backhaul, where the issues of sharing are less political or less problematic, let's say. Does that answer your question, Jim?
Yeah, I mean that makes sense where the emphasis is initially going to be, because everyone can segment their use of fiber much differently than they can of an overall broadband,
Right, as long as there's enough network bandwidth in the fiber, then there's not as much issues or contention, and it's a lot more secure. In a conduit, you can actually have separate micro ducts within the conduit that are public safety is separate from the other stuff, that kind of thing.
Just to share a little bit of our experience, when you talk about shared assets, whether it's fiber, buildings, towers, whatever the case might be, it always raises issues about who paid to put it in the first place, and then what do they expect to get out of it if somebody else is going to use it, kind of thing. So it will open up a lot of those kinds of discussions, and it will be difficult to work through and how it's all just state fiber to put in, the state's using it, so be it. But if you're looking to share assets of other local jurisdictions and such, don't expect the road to be easy.
And I'm not expecting, the only thing going in favor of it is that they actually get something back, which is access to the national broadband. But I agree. That's why I'm kind of staying away from the physical stuff as much as I possibly can.
So you got to have a good salesperson. I mean, the bottom line is, while your public safety officials or your health education folks may understand or see the benefit of that, when it starts getting to the approvals of governing bodies who are looking at cost and budget, those arguments need to overweight those things, I guess. So you have to have
who has access to the actual physical space, when, and what the procedures to go through, and who has to hold whose hand when they do so. All right, I appreciate that. Okay. If something comes to mind, shoot me an email.
So from a real high-level timeline kind of thing, what are you seeing happening in the next?
We do have a timeline on the last slide, and it's up to date with what's currently going on. So I'll if you can wait till then.
Okay.
Okay. Also, we're working through coordination and outreach. Like I mentioned before, we did provided input to the SCIP update process, and that was approved. At the last SIEC meeting, we kind of went and gave a background due to the fact that we have 6 new commissioners on board, so we did a little more history and background on an update on Public Safety Broadband Network to them. So that presentation is linked in this presentation. We also gave a session at the APCO-NENA, the Arizona APCO-NENA, on Public Safety Broadband Network to kind of ramp them up and bring them into the loop on this. Continuing with Digital Arizona and 911. We met with Salt River Project representatives, and it wasn't really so much just to meet with Salt River as a single utility, as they were connected to us through the UTC, which is the Utility Telecommunications Council, a nationwide entity, and Salt River, the individual that we talked to, heads their technical group, and they're looking to get a kind of a uniform approach between utilities and public safety broadband nationally, and so we're kind of having discussions, but it seems they need frequency and we may need assets. So that's basically what ends up being a possible win-win. Nationally, we're working, PSIC office is providing support and input to the Statement of Requirements document. We had meetings and working sessions in May, June, and August, and plan to complete it by September sometime. Went to the NGA, National Government Association forum, and here it was the same presenters that have been communicating, the NTIA, FCC, and so forth, but they really drove home the fact that public safety land mobile radio systems will continue to be required. This is a data solution, not a mission-critical voice solution. So that was helpful because it was kind of a different audience. It was actually governors, representatives, and it was also co-sponsored by NASIO, so CIOs were present. States should include their CIOs in the planning process, which we're fortunate that our state CIO is also head of the PSCC, or chair of the PSCC. Again, driving home the cost issue, and the people need to be creative with public-private partnerships. And then the side breakout, representatives from the western states expressed an interest in forming regional planning because of the unique characteristics of the western states. As the guy from Montana said, a lot of dirt between light bulbs. Yes, I thought so. And it gets the point across. It really works.
We usually say about a Scorpio in the funeral.
All right. The NTIA asked for input on how to manage the state and local implementation grant program. We provided input that went through Homeland Security to NGA. We also worked on the waiver recipient LAC group that submitted a response, and then we sent ours directly to the NTIA. And then the upcoming meeting is APCO. In August, Justin will be representing our public safety broadband need, and at that meeting, they believe, the rumor is, that they're going to announce the members of the FirstNet board. We've also been having discussions with vendors. Generally, they fall into 2 categories: those that want to provide support for the SIEC guidance and analysis. Okay, they want to provide SIEC guidance and analysis. That's RCC, Televate, Federal Engineering, and SAIC. And then others want to become FirstNet partners and help build out the backbone of the national network. And some want to contemplate both, but we haven't figured out if that's going to be acceptable. Once we get the grant guidance, then we'll kind of know the rules and rights around that. I already mentioned our discussions with Televate and their Minnesota study. Probably going to bring, there's a study that Federal Engineering did in Oregon. I want to take a look at that one too. And then OCS Networks was in giving a demo to Maricopa County Sheriffs. Also, they had their equipment around, so I went over there. It's a self-contained Pelican case kind of 4G LTE in a box. And they can be deployed on the fly, and the sales guys and the tech guys had their little iPhones and eye cameras going, and they surrounded a desk. So it works. That's right.
Michael, out of curiosity, did the Minnesota study indicate how much money would be required based on expanding that nationwide?
I haven't actually done, they did it for their state, and they would need for their state, I think it was like double what was projected to be received, and an ongoing maintenance cost of like $12 million. Okay,
so we need like double $7 billion plus the monthly O&M is going to be like $200 for every user.
Maybe something like that. and in the projected, I don't think anything is actually going to start being spent for that $7 billion until 2015. So by that time, the relative cost of private versus national public safety broadband network, who knows what the differential is going to be. All right, but to get to this, the bolded ones are the upcoming FirstNet board being stood up, and then the guidance for the SIEC legislatively is supposed to happen August 22nd. But since it's supposed to have input from FirstNet, we'll probably end up with wave one being just a very generic, here's how the grant's going to work, and then later on, and I predict like Q1, that we'll actually get the meat of the grant guidance, and they'll open up the grant process. Okay, any questions, any discussion?
Comment for the record, I know this is a funny topic, but as far as the private sector, if they're under contract with municipal corporations usually require the ability to transmit on radio and data systems with the municipal corporations. So I want to make sure it's noted that private entities are required to use the system.
Required
by contract with the municipal corporation.
By contract, not municipal.
Just want to make sure that you understand that when private entities enter into a contract with municipal corporations or rent service, they require the private entity to be able to communicate with them on radio and data systems. So
from a private entity under contract to
municipal corporation.
Okay, so
it has a requirement to communicate with on the radio system and data system. So as part of who participates, just want to make sure that's not.
Okay, I'll follow up with you after. I want to understand what you. Will you state your name and affiliation for the record also, please?
Joe Gibson with Rural Metro.
Thank you. Is there anyone else with questions or comments from the committee or the audience? Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to item 6,
topic on AIR's Improvement and Sustainability Plan, and Karen Ellen's presentation. Hello.
Okay. You're aware that the AIRS has been built out over 15 counties, and we've had agencies that expressed interest in expanding that coverage. So we're looking for comments today on the draft procedure that's been created on the AIRS Improvement and Sustainability Plan, and it's made to establish the requirements for integrating locally procured site infrastructure into the current AIRS system. So when we were going through this, we looked for a way to say, okay, what are the responsibilities of the requesting agency, what are the responsibilities of DPS, and what are the responsibilities of this committee and the PSIC office. We identified that in the draft that it looks like the agency that's requesting it should be responsible for all funding. So if they need to get grants, if they need to find locally secured funds, that's up to them. Site permissions and acquisitions, they need to determine where they're going to put this. So they need to determine, how do I get permissions to add my equipment onto a specific tower, and then whatever else comes with that. Equipment purchases, installations, they also need to identify how that's all going to be paid for, and then ongoing maintenance. Once they decide to do this, they've entered into a relationship to keep the system up and running. The agency is going to be encouraged to look at the current coverage. So where does AIRS cover now? Where should AIRS cover now? And how are you going to enhance that coverage by what you're recommending? DPS needs to be involved in this. Obviously, DPS is maintaining the current AIRS system. They have certain requirements to make sure that the new equipment is going to work with the current equipment. So there is a coordination that needs to occur before sorry, I thought I touched something. Before this is all moved forward. So there's a site application form that's been placed on the PSIC website that has to be submitted to DPS, who will assign the engineer to meet with the agency. They can have a conversation to discuss, this is where the site should be, what are the potential issues here, what kind of interference do we need to worry about, what kind of coverage is that site going to provide, and then are there any other recommendations that DPS is going to come up with based on their knowledge of the system. DPS will also give their minimum requirements for what needs to go into the system. They want to make sure that whatever this agency is putting up is going to match what's already out there. And they also will be going into an IGA with DPS. These will be individual because every site is going to be a little bit different. So DPS will work with the agency to identify how that IGA should be set up. We also ask that the agency notify the PSIC office so that we're aware of anything that's happening with Homeland Security grants that may be potentially coming forward. Once the agency decides to do this, they do need to know that they're owning this equipment. They're taking responsibility for this site. So they're going to be responsible for maintenance and repair of the infrastructure and the equipment. They need to understand that this isn't just equipment that affects their agency. This affects users across the state. So they need to be ready to take care of it. They also, if they choose not to use their local techs to take care of it, that if they want to get a contract, maybe a third-party vendor, that's fine. But that's going to be their responsibility. That's not going to fall back on DPS. So they need to decide if that's which direction works best for them. If there's any issues with their equipment, and they need to let the DPS NOC know, because again, this equipment affects everybody across the state. So if someone has a problem in a certain region, they're going to be calling DPS to find out what's happening, and DPS needs to be aware as soon as possible that a locally owned site has issues and kind of what's the go forward from there. They are going to be responsible for making repairs as soon as possible, and they'll also be asked to do preventative maintenance, hopefully twice a year, but at least once a year to make sure that everything is working properly on that site. We also would ask in this draft document that they maintain critical spare parts so that there's not a long lag time when it comes time to fix anything.
Karen, just a question on this. Once an agency decides to add an air suite or whatever to a site, we say maintain the equipment for the life of the site. Does that mean that they can opt out at some point, or is there an expectation that once you've committed to the air site there that you're going to maintain it for as long as DPS keeps that site active, or is there an opt-out provision that after 3 years an agency says, I can no longer afford to maintain this, I'm out, and I'm going to have to remove all that equipment?
We don't have an opt-out site, but that probably needs to be addressed, so we can put a note in here.
I think these are. I like all of these. I'm just thinking that this also comes with dollar signs, and with shrinking budgets, at some point someone's going to have a great idea, and then 5 years from now, their agency is going to say that's not such a great idea. And I'm just wondering, is there a method to stop at some point? Because the expectation is as the user community, we may become accustomed to the site or use the coverage of the site, and then at some point it's going to not be there anymore, and there needs to be at least, I don't know if we just say you can't do it, you need to plan for the life of the site, or if we're going to allow that, what's the plan for how you decommission? Yeah, get out of it.
Or is there a way to hand it off somewhere?
The whole idea of trying to keep the system whole if somebody decides to withdraw, basically. If they put something in and want to withdraw, then how do you keep it whole? I guess the other follow-up point that I would make here, too, the notes I was jotting down really are about, I think, having some firm kinds of service-level agreements in those intergovernmental agreements, such that it gets maintained at minimally at least the same service level that DPS provides for the other sites. And so, I would look to see something more than, making repairs as soon as possible is pretty vague. No less than 1 year, preferably twice. Is it once or is it twice? Making some very specific service level type of agreements is part of those intergovernmental agreements.
And when we were drafting this portion of the procedure, it's a little bit challenging because a lot of these requirements are items that really belong in the IGA between the Department of Public Safety and the agency. And so our thought was, let's establish some high-level guidance in this document, and then since DPS is responsible for the overall operations of the air system, that the IGA negotiated between DPS and the specific agency would go into those types of detail. But of course, this is obviously still in very early draft form, so we're making notes of these comments to, I guess there's ways to strengthen this.
I think the other thing that I would consider, too, and I don't mean to get you off track on your thing, but while I'm thinking about it, it's kind of it's a service desk kind of an issue. Who do you report a problem to get it fixed? Do I have to know who owns which site now to call them? And is there a list for me to do that, or do I just call DPS and then they coordinate with that end user?
Call DPS. And that's going to be it's a little bit farther in.
Okay.
Because
that's
a great question, because we had a conversation about that. I mean, truly, is anybody going to be able to do that? Probably not. As far as the time frame, one of the things we did put in here, and like Justin said, I had a couple conversations with DPS, because my thought's the same as yours, is that they need to be held to the same level of accountability. And we've had kind of a banter back and forth about what's a time frame that's a reasonable expectation as far as getting something fixed. So we did put something in here under the maintenance section in 2.4. If I can read. Yep. 2.4 that said, it's however reasonable and necessary to request zoning agencies to target service restoration times that do not exceed 10 days. If restoration is to exceed 10-day period, the owning agency will notify the DPS NOC and the SIEC in writing. So we put that in there, and again, that 10-day is a tough one because what's the perfect time period? Most of the time, we want it back up and running as soon as we can because somebody may have an operation where they need it.
Well, and some of them just, snowfall or something, they won't be able to access them for
and we did talk about we put there's something in here about that too, that we know that due to the remote locations of the air sites, the access conditions, methods, and seasonal changes, it's not possible to require specific or guaranteed service restoration times. That's before the 10-day, because there are going to be some sites that are going to be challenging to get to.
But again, that gets back.
This is Mark Nitti. Just tying in with that is 3.2, and I think there's a little bit of, 3.2 doesn't flow very good for me. Whether it's grammatically or just because there's a little bit of a conflict. Because I think as I read 3.2, I think we could make the second sentence specifically, when we're talking maintenance activities, whether planned or unplanned, that may impact the subscriber's usage of the system, and we have a semicolon, I don't know what that's for, will require notification by the agency to the DPS NOC within a week of the start date Well, if it's unplanned, it's not going to be within a week. And up above, we say immediately. So I think if we separated that out and said, unplanned events, you need to make notification as soon as you know. Planned events need a week advance notice, but maybe work a little bit on 3.2 to make it more consistent with that section 2.4. Or am I just reading it wrong? You can tell me I'm reading it wrong.
No, that's a really good point, because you're right. How are you going to tell somebody a week ahead about an unplanned event? You'd be pretty good if you could.
I guess if we could separate that out a little bit and clean that section up.
Yep, we'll look at that. Thank you. Is there any other questions on this?
On the whole thing or just that section?
As far as we've gotten.
Okay. Because I have section 4 questions.
Okay. Forward to that. This kind of hits what we were just talking about. So we want to make sure that notification's being done. If there's any, I'm sorry, let me take that back. This is actually when you're getting ready to provide a packet for approval. So when you're getting ready to decide if you want to have a site, what's being recommended is that the agency let their neighbors know what's happening. So an agency decides that they're going to put a site up at a specific location, that they either make a phone call or put something in writing out to their neighboring agencies to let them know that this is what they're looking to do and get input from them. Is this something that's going to help their users? Does that agency have any feedback as far as, well, wow, if you make it a little bit more robust, maybe it can help cover some issues that we're having in this area. So we ask that they reach out and talk to their neighbors, make sure that they all know what's happening. We'll also ask in here in this draft is that they gather support letters from the Arizona Department of Homeland Security Regional Advisory Council and the Regional Interoperability Committee, if there is one. And again, going back to giving some kind of documentation in their packet that shows that their neighboring agencies are in this with them and support them. Or if they have concerns, include that as well. As far as DPS responsibilities, like I said before, most of the responsibility is going to fall on the agency. There's some responsibilities that have to fall on DPS just based on their role. So they'll maintain the documentation that's provided to them by the agency. They'll also maintain information on the overall status. So that's where it falls back on that agency to make sure that they're updating DPS on what's happening with the ERS system. We also ask the agency provide 24/7 contact to DPS and keep that updated so that if something happens to a site and maybe a jurisdiction reports an issue with that site, DPS knows immediately who do I contact 24/7 to get them to fix it. And then they'll also keep maintenance and repair records, which will be provided by the agency to them. That was in section 4, so I want to mark. If I start passing what you have to talk about, let me know. So we do ask that a packet be put together and that this information is included in that packet. It's going to have a letter from the requesting agency outlining the project. It'll tell us where the location is, a single point of contact for that agency so we know who to refer our questions and comments back to. What's their funding mechanism going to be and what's the projected budget going to be for this project? We want to make sure that they are already an approved member or approved to use AIRS, and do they have their AIRS MOU all signed? Also, do they have their site application form approved by DPS? So they already had those meetings and they're where they can be there. Do they have any input in system documentation design and any equipment list that DPS has provided so that their approval groups have everything they need to know what this agency has done? The IGA doesn't need to be signed until after the SIEC has approved the whole packet, so that IGA will come with this packet before it's signed by the agency or DPS. Any documentation that I just spoke about in terms of the letters from the neighboring agencies and the two organizations. Questions on the...
Okay, so kind of in there, 4.3 and this, it ties into the documentation checklist 4.5. It has an IGA. What about for non-governmental agencies? Shouldn't that be an MOU or IGA or MOU? If Guardian wanted to put up a site, I'm not a governmental agency. I know Joe Gibson's there. I heard him earlier. He represents Rural Metro, not a governmental agency, but somebody who may want to put up a site.
Yeah, I think we can change that language to say IGA or whatever the appropriate contract vehicle is. It would obviously, because it's with Department of Public Safety, each of these will have to have Attorney General approval, and whatever contract form they would require, we can add that into the option.
Yeah, I just didn't want to limit to IGA because that eliminates any other organization.
I would recommend adding two other things to this list. I think one, some documentation as to the site access, the approval to use the site from whomever the site owner is, whether that's a lease or whatever. And then secondly, any documentation that demonstrates that the project's complied with all the NHPA, NEPA requirements.
And Jesse's point earlier, we might want to also add a sustainability plan to this list. It's standard for Homeland Security grants, but we can't assume that this project will fall through a Homeland Security project.
You kind of broke up on that. Could you repeat what you just said?
Yeah, just what Jesse was recommending earlier, including a narrative about the sustainability plan for the air suite overall. So we had asked for the funding mechanism and the project budget, but that's just how do we get it built. We should probably also include something about sustainability plan for the life of the equipment.
Okay, but it's not tied directly to a Homeland Security grant. It's just a sustainability plan.
Correct.
Yeah. The purpose of that would be so that somebody just doesn't up one, knowing they can't afford to keep it going down the road, because everybody's sucked into using it and they bail, knowing that somebody else at that point would probably be pressured into picking up the cost. Does that make sense?
You do that someone, Pete.
I think it's DPS.
Would the IGA with DPS include the authorization to make use of the frequencies? That doesn't need to be something separate.
Based on the way we're currently managing interoperability within the state, DPS has by default become the frequency manager.
Well, two of those frequencies are actually licensed directly to DPS, right?
Right. Yeah. And today, now whether it stays that way in the future, I mean, that's something of discussion.
Through the MOU that you have today, though, you give end users the right to operate on them, but that's, in my view, that's a little bit different than saying take it and put it under your lone base station on a mountain somewhere.
Right. And I don't know how we'd approach that issue, whether the state would license it or the agency at the proposed location become a state license, or we allow the agency to license it on their own behalf. Most places, so far, we've licensed the site.
Correct. Well, so one of the things we would need to accomplish here, though, is making sure that there's a proper license that's been approved for use at that site.
And that would be part of the signed agreement with DPS, whether it's the IGA or MOU or MOA or whatever.
Any other questions? Okay, so once the packet's ready, it needs to be submitted to the PSIC office at least 6 weeks before the next SIEC meeting. And that's going to allow the PSIC office to post anything that's non-confidential out to the PSIC office website for a 2-week public comment period. Once those comments are collected, they will be provided to the agency that submitted the request and DPS, and then they'll also be included in the SIEC packet. The technical work group, the SIEC technical work group, will review the paperwork first. They'll go through it and provide findings to the SIEC with a recommended course of action. The PSIC office will place the packet and request it on the next SIEC agenda, SIEC reviews everything, and including the public comment, and then the requesting agency will be encouraged at that point to attend the meeting to answer any questions that the SIEC may come up with. And then once a decision is made at the meeting, a letter will be sent to the requesting agency by the PSIC office advising them if they've been approved or denied, or if additional assessment is. Any questions up to that point? Okay, so the feedback that we received from you today will be incorporated into this draft procedure. It'll also be placed on the PSIC website for public review for 2 weeks, and then it will be brought back to the next meeting for possible approval.
Kevin, I assume you're plugged into this and are okay with the direction it's going? If not, speak now or forever hold your peace.
Karen, Scott and I may have a couple of comments here.
Okay.
We're proceeding.
You're plugged into it, though? Okay.
Yeah. There are a couple of things that brought to my attention this morning that I didn't question.
Just a question, this might be for Scott, but I think Prescott or Yavapai County received some SIEC funding to put a site in their area. Did that proceed, or are they pending this approval before they move forward with that?
I believe that actually is part of this year's grant cycle, and so while it received RAC approval, no grants have been awarded yet in this cycle. So that's pending.
So our expectation would be they would need to follow this policy or procedure if it's approved through the RAC, which it sounds like they were allocated, but they haven't received their award notice yet.
Correct. Yeah.
I think in principle, even not approved, it's the direction we would take until then, like when we expanded into Black Canyon City, or Yavapai County, is they had to come to the SIEC with proposal and concurrence. This is just the formalized structure that stuff like this would occur in the future.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Sure. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to address the committee on that topic? None. Okay. We'll move on to the next item on our agenda. Go back over to it. We've got Justin with the 2013 OAC Technical Assistance Request, and this is an information discussion item.
And so clearly I give my coworkers the hard stuff, and then I take the easy stuff. The grant monies and things of that nature, the giving of gifts. It is actually the Office of Emergency Communications at the federal level runs a program called the Interoperable Communications Technical Assistance Program, or ITTAP. That organization, or program I should say, every year offers a significant amount of technical assistance to the states. Arizona has been very fortunate that we have been able to take advantage of these TAs to support both the implementation of a number of SCIP initiatives, but also to support local agencies and jurisdictions in their key interoperable projects. Typically, we have done this much later in the fall. As you know, the federal budget normally fiscal year begins in October. And so they have waited in the past to do this beginning in October with requests all being due 1st of December. This year, OEC really got on the ball, got things moving, and their goal is to have the technical assistance awards presented by the beginning of the federal fiscal year. So we're starting this process much earlier this year. Before I get into some of the changes for the technical assistance program this year, just wanted to highlight what we were able to accomplish last year through the 2012 TA process. La Paz County received a TICP development workshop. That workshop was actually a two-part workshop in May, and then with the final workshop in June. And so that La Paz County now has a completed TICP and it's just now in the formal approval processes. The RWC and TRWC are currently working on developing a strategic communications plan. That process was kicked off in the beginning of June with an all-day stakeholder workshop over at the Maricopa County Association of Government. Had a whole bunch of agencies and participants from both of those cooperatives discussing the long-term strategic vision for this region. And I should say long-term strategic vision for those two organizations, but they also brought in folks like DPS, Maricopa County, and others that that their vision impacts the operations of others. That process is moving forward, and we're fortunate the Office of Emergency Communications is allowing this specific TA to carry on past the end of September. So that's still an ongoing process with their next in-person workshop to review the draft strategic plan, still to be scheduled. The third technical assistance we were awarded last year was a training and exercise plan workshop. Due to the way that training and exercise plans are developed here in the state, with local counties and agencies developing their own plans and then those kind of rolling up, that TA is actually still pending. There is a training and exercise plan workshop this Thursday with the Department of Health that we'll be participating in. Susan went to the county Southern Track workshop.
Oh, yes, the multi-year, that was all the counties. It was in Tucson and Team County.
Thank you. The Southern Rack kind of multi-year workshop earlier this year. And so we're looking at how best we can take advantage of this TA to support the existing state efforts, with the primary focus of ensuring that interoperable communications is addressed throughout all of these different TEP workshops, or excuse me, the training and exercise plans. In addition to that, last January, we received a special technical assistance. This was prior to it being in the technical assistance catalog. It was one of their beta classes, but a public safety communications project management workshop. And we were able to get that because of Lisa's involvement as the National Council of Statewide Interoperable Coordinators. And so that was a fourth TA that we were able to get this year. The other two TA requests that we made last year, each state can make up to 5 requests every year. We also requested a mobile communications vehicle support and an auxiliary communications workshop. Both of those were deferred. The feds don't actually ever come out and tell you, no, you can't have it. They just say the decision's deferred, and sometimes the fiscal year ends before you actually get it. So we were not able to get those. In fact, those two workshops were very popular nationwide, and it led the Office of Emergency Communications to produce a series of videos for those workshops. The videos are very condensed versions of both of those, but they are now both posted publicly at publicsafetytools.info, and we'll have a link on our website to those. And I should also highlight that the auxiliary communications workshop, that video that's posted is actually taught by Dan Wills.
Actually, it's the comment one.
I got the wrong one. It's the comment one. There are a number of videos that are up there. But both of those are available online to get a sense for the information that is presented during those workshops. So that leads us to the 2013 offerings. This year, in the past, at least one of the technical assistance requests had to have supported a UASI need. This year, the Office of Emergency Communications has changed that and said that at least one of the requests must directly address a gap that was identified during the NECP Goal 2 assessment process. They have gone through and reviewed all of the information that we submitted last year for Goal 2. And OEC has recommended 2 specific offerings for us that we could request. It's not required that we request one of these, but based on the review of our NECP Goal 2 information, they recommend requesting either the governance assessment, which is a consulting services that looks at all the existing governance structures within a region, county, or the state level, and analyzes kind of how it works, documents the entire process, and makes recommendations for improvement. And in the past, we have gotten that. We have requested that particular TA twice, one at the statewide level initially, and then, Paul, I believe that was also the TA that Pima County had a couple of years back when PC Win had the TA.
Yeah, we did a TIC-P one.
I know we did a TIC-P one. I thought we did that one too. We may not have. The second offering that they recommended for Arizona was for a communications-focused tabletop exercise. To my memory, in the last 5 years, the only time we've requested that was Yuma did a TTX several years ago, and that was viewed as a very positive offering. Certainly that one would be designed more for a county that has closed a number of gaps and are willing and are ready to exercise and kind of reassess where everything is and to show progress made from the NACP Goal 2 assessment. From the timeline, we sent out the catalog last Friday to everyone and are requesting comments from folks throughout the state on specific offerings that they think Arizona should request. Today, we'd like your thoughts on different offerings that you think should be included. We need to have those comments back by August 24th, so 10 days from now. And in particular, we would appreciate written comments. That certainly helps us in being able to make the case when we have our review with Homeland Security on who is requesting what the need is for, what SCIP initiatives it aligns with, what local initiatives or NACP Goal 2 gaps that it aligns with. So we'll get all those comments back on the 24th. We will compile the recommendations, meet with the Department of Homeland Security, and get their concurrence on this. As the state's administrative agency, OEC requires us to consult with them. And then the actual application is due no later than August 31st. So we are definitely on a somewhat compressed time frame to get this done.
Justin, was there any effort after the NACP assessments to identify the biggest gaps that we noted and then to prioritize those so that maybe we can target those specifically with our application?
Yeah, the single largest gap that we've been working on over the last year and a half now, since the first reports began finishing, was the development and documentation of tactical interoperable communications plans, TICPs. Also the development of stamps. In a number of counties, there was need for SOPs, specific SOPs to be drafted. I guess the third or fourth priority there, depending on how you count, would be the training of COMELs, specifically certification of COMELs. So those are one of the reasons why we've had such a heavy focus in our office over the last year. From a TICP standpoint, in fact, thank you, Susan, there are a number of TAs that kind of fit into these. Obviously, the TICP development workshop itself, but also the building of regional governance structures, TICP update workshops. In some areas, that might be appropriate. I think Yuma just updated their TICPs. Right now, we have 7 counties that have complete TICPs, 4 that are in process. The Navajo, Apache, excuse me, one second, thank you, La Paz, and Senators, thank you. I had it handy and then my...
Those are the 4 that are in process?
Those are the 4 that are in process right now. The remaining ones that we have that there are grant applications in for Yavapai County, And then the East RAC submitted a grant application for a RAC-wide TICP. So that would get Grand, Greenlee, and Santa Cruz kind of all covered by one. I'm sorry, Grand, Greenlee, and Gila all covered by one. So those four, assuming those are covered or those grants are approved this year, there would be grant funding to get those 4 counties with TICPs. And then that would get done.
So Justin, I think if I heard you right, you said La Paz is still working on theirs?
Almost done.
They're almost done. The workshop was in
June. What I'm assuming then is on the 2012 where it says La Paz complete, that was probably Cocamino County's complete?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, up above the where I said complete up there, I meant the technical assistance portion of it was complete. Right now, the TICP is actually finished. It's just in the approval phase. So
okay. I understand.
Various agencies are approving it. Sorry for the confusion there. But we do have a specific RAC or specific grant dollars set aside from the North and South RACs to make sure that Apache, Navajo, and Santa Cruz County get their TICPs done. And those are the 3 that we're working on next. Other potential offerings, the RCES SCAMP, Strategic Communications Migration Plan. Again, the North RAC has grant funds for the development of a strategic plan for the North RAC, but that may be something that other counties or regions are in a position now to take advantage of. I don't want to go through kind of all the different TAs that we have here. We have highlighted a number of the TAs that we think are appropriate given the NECP Goal 2 gaps and our strategic plan, statewide plan to SCIP. But certainly there are a number of other offerings in there. There are 46 different offerings. Kind of what I'd like to be able to do now is just kind of get your thoughts on the general direction that you feel we should go. Are there ones? One of the key elements when requesting an offering is it does need to be an offering that we're able to take advantage of within the next fiscal year for the feds. If we don't have it completed by that time period, the money goes away and we don't get to keep it. So that's the key element is when we're requesting these, they need to be something that we can take advantage of.
Comments from the committee?
I have a question. So besides the TICPs, which we've talked about in some detail, and Justin mentioned with the regional plan, what is the current feeling from the committee about regional plan? My current feeling is that with the lack of funding, the regional plans are a little bit difficult to actually do in the sense that we don't see a clear path for how we're going to be able to fund what we're doing in some of these regions. The other question I would have is, with the COMEL dollars that we've had, I think we have some left over. Susan, is that correct? And we're planning a few additional classes, so that wouldn't necessarily be a gap that we want to look at closing.
Yeah, we definitely have some COMEL and COMT funding. And depending on the final dollar amounts that are left, we can hold a certain combination of both of those. And we have our upcoming COMEL Field Day, which is the equivalent of the All Hazards COMEL exercise.
I can say that I was kind of scanning through the whole catalog of the TA offerings the other day, and the things that really had popped out to me had to do with a bunch of the exercising types of activities, and so it's kind of interesting to see that OEC was recommending at least one of those as an offering to us as well. And particularly if we complete the NECP goal evaluations, we're doing the follow-up now and trying to do the TICPs and some of the planning associated with that. I think it is appropriate to then try to go back to those areas and actually exercise those plans and make sure that they worked where they're supposed to, people know how to apply them and so on. So that would be at least one comment that I would make.
I agree with Paul. I think, at least from when DHS came and reviewed our UOSP, and I presume in some of the other parts, they may not have as much technology, but the direction from us was you have a lot of stuff, but we don't necessarily know how to effectively use all of the stuff we have. So I like the concept of at least full-scale exercises are hard to do. It's hard to get people away from their jobs, and there's just no backfill, there's no overtime. It's hard to do that, but I think tabletops are a little bit more manageable for people to get out, and I think we learn a lot when we walk through certain things and find out where our gaps are. So that would be a recommendation I would at least look at, is probably for the areas that are farther along in their capabilities, those that need, that are still kind of have a larger gap, that may not be appropriate for them, but I think some of the counties are pretty far along and would benefit quite a bit from the tabletop exercise.
Any other comments or thoughts?
Any comments from the audience?
One more, Paul. I think they had mentioned the auxiliary communications workshops. I think we had asked about that one, or we had put in for that one, but it was deferred in the nice terms. Is that, I haven't looked at the calendar, but or the offering, but is that more related to like your auxiliary communication support, like amateur radio operators, RACES areas?
Correct.
That was another gap that during our analysis of the Phoenix urban area strategy, we were hit pretty significantly that we have not been capitalizing on our volunteer agencies as much as we probably should from the interoperable communications aspect. So that one jumps out at me as another one. I presume that everywhere in the state, they're not utilizing those resources probably as much as they could or should be. And that might generate some interest in incorporating those groups into our responder plan.
Sure.
Well, with that,
A little bit of direction anyway.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We will get those compiled and also all the feedback that we get from the public and keep you up to date. I appreciate the feedback.
Dusty. And then I guess I'm up on this one here. This is going to be really brief. But just item 8, real briefly, wanted to kind of make an announcement, have a little bit of a discussion, I guess, if any, on an upcoming public outreach workshop that's going to be conducted on September the 4th on the environmental and historic preservation compliance for public safety communications facilities. This kind of got put together as an outgrowth of some of our activities in Pima County, a lot of lessons that we learned in building out our communication sites, and the FCC was looking for an opportunity to do some public outreach in Arizona and other places. So in coordination with the PSIC office, they'll be hosting the workshop at the Carnegie Center, which is down here on Washington on the 4th. It'll be kind of an all-day deal from 9 a.m. to 4. We have presenters, Stephen Del Sordo from the FCC, who is their Environmental Historic Preservation Compliance Officer, Eric Larilla from the State SHPO office. We have Courtney Rose and Linda Mayrow will be coming up from our Pima County Cultural Resources office, and we are still trying to confirm a presenter from one of the Tribal Historic Preservation offices. Most of the presentations will be conducted throughout the morning and the early afternoon, and the latter part of the day then being a panel discussion and case study using 4 or 5 examples from our project. Hopefully the idea being that those in attendance can learn from some of the lessons that we learned and be better prepared to, to construct towers and communications facilities themselves in the future. We've got about 25-ish or so people that have registered to date, and we encourage everybody to attend or send someone who you think might need to. Questions? None. And we'll move on to item 9, the PSIC office, the project update. And this is Justin as well, I guess. Not going to be Justin.
I'm not going to take any time. We're out of time. So I will just note a couple of things, because otherwise Susan will get mad at me, and I don't like when Susan's mad at me, which is we're proud to say that we have 3 new certified COMELs in the state, and we'd like to acknowledge them. Jason Hatchett from Guardian Medical Transport, Bradley Schmidt from 91st Civil Support Team of the National Guard, Jeff Shripsima, of the City of Phoenix Fire Department. We now currently have 18 individuals from 5 counties who have been approved, so kudos. We did receive some national recognition by our program being featured at the national level, and so we're very proud of that. Any questions about the multiple project updates? Our next SIEC meeting will be in September. We'll certainly have our regularly scheduled update from this meeting. Quite a lot of items that are in your multiple projects update were covered in some detail today. Any questions, concerns, desires for us to be focusing on something that we're not focusing on, et cetera, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll just keep marching forward. And when you do have a chance to read through this and review it, if you have any questions or issues, please feel free to email either Justin or myself. There are upcoming RAC meetings here in August, so we encourage people to participate. A lot of them will be teleconferences. It will be a live meeting, from what I understand, in the Southern RAC in Tucson. Other than that, they'll be teleconferences. So check the Homeland Security site if you need that information. Any questions from the committee or comments? Thanks to the committee, thanks to my staff, and we're closed.
Thank you. And with that, we'll take a call to the public. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the committee? Hearing none. I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
I'll move.
I was a triple for yourself trying to get there. We have a second. Anybody else? Mark?
I'll second it.
Okay. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.